Hey everyone, this is Leanne from Of Love and Shiplap and the founder of Sublimation Graphics and Tutorials on Facebook. If you are joining us on YouTube, please be sure to come join our Facebook group where all of our videos air live before they're added to our YouTube channel unedited. And of course, if you're catching us live on Facebook, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Those links are in the video description depending on where you're watching. Today's tutorial is on how to add angel wings to a memorial graphic in Affinity Designer. So this is a pretty common question that we see. Memorial t-shirts and plaques are very popular, and what most people want to do is remove the background of a photo and add wings and maybe some clouds and some type of background behind the loved one that they are creating this graphic of. So it's actually a lot easier than you might think in Affinity Designer. So I'm pretty excited to show this to you. I know it will help a lot of you out. We're using Affinity Designer on a Windows PC. If you are using the Mac version, all of the steps that you will follow are the same. There are some minor nuances that are different on a Mac. One of the main ones that's worth noting is that the panels that you see that I have docked on the side here, you cannot dock them on the side if you are using a Mac, but you can drag them out and have them floating. These panels are usually down here. I just like to be able to see all of my layers easily, so I keep mine out like this. I've had this question a few times, so I thought it was worth starting to add that to videos, that is just one of those things that the Mac version doesn't offer. But in terms of capabilities, it is all the same. If you enjoy this tutorial, be sure to check out our free tutorials located under the Group Guides tab or on our YouTube channel under the Affinity Designer playlist. And if you are interested in learning everything there is to know about Affinity Designer, from the very basic of knowledge to becoming much more advanced in your skills and how to use all of the tools and features, then be sure to check out our Affinity Designer Digital Graphic Design Masterclass for Sublimation. This is a 100-hour video course complete with design challenges and opportunities to win prizes to give you a complete, immersive, easy to follow learning experience that is perfect for beginners and those who even have a little bit more advanced experience with Affinity Designer alike. I promise that you will gain so much from this program that we've put together. It is learn at your own pace on your own schedule. And if you want to see what others are saying, simply click on the hashtag ADMC in our Facebook group. So we will start by going to File and opening up a new document, not an artboard. We want to be working with a document. You can just choose any general size that you prefer to make your design. If you have a template because you're doing a full bleed t-shirt or some other type of substrate, then you would of course want to open up that document and work with that. But since I'm just making a generic one that we would just put it in the center of a shirt for memorial shirt, I'm just going to choose my standard design size, which is 3600 pixels by 3600 pixels or 12 inches by 12 inches at a minimum of 300 DPI. You want to make sure that your color format for sublimation is set to RGB/8, and your color profile for all newer printers, basically everyone who should be following along at this point, is going to be the sRGB IEC 61966-2.1. And we do want to make sure that that transparent background is also checked. Sublimation is the only type of printing that does not follow the CMYK rule. And if you want to learn all about the science of sublimation and why that is, join our Affinity Designer Digital Graphic Design Masterclass, because I do go into that pretty in depth and explain all of the fun lingo that relates to graphic design through that course. Now, I will just let you guys know, for anyone who is completely new to Affinity Designer, these presets are ones that I have created for all the different things that I tend to do on the regular. If you want to add a preset, you simply set your dimensions and all of your other settings that you want, if you want bleed or margins, and then you hit that little plus sign and it will add it. Well, it's saying that I already have one, obviously, but yours would say untitled if you had not set it before. So you'd hit that plus sign and it will add one of these little boxes, and then you can just right click on it to rename it. And then you'll always have that preset every time you go to open a new document. It's a neat little feature that you can take advantage of. So when you're ready, we'll just go ahead and hit create. We're going to be working primarily in our pixel persona. Affinity Designer is a vector-based program, and vector artwork is what is most ideal for all types of printing. It's the #1 recommended file type for all types of printing because it is infinitely scalable. But what we're going to be doing, working with a photograph and a JPEG of wings, these are already pixel based files, which means that they're not going to be infinitely scalable anyways. And the edits that we want to make to them need to be done in our pixel persona, which is just another workspace of Affinity Designer. Now, the pixel persona is a roster or pixel based workspace. If you're not familiar with what that word means, it just refers to graphics that are made up of tiny pixels. And if you're familiar with Photoshop, the types of features that are in the pixel persona are the types of features you would find in a program like Photoshop. All of the features that are in the designer persona are what you would find in a program like Corel Draw or Adobe Illustrator. The pixel persona in Affinity Designer just gives us just enough features to do things like we're about to do tonight. But if you wanted full roster editing like you would have in Photoshop, then you would choose Affinity Photo. We will be rolling out we will be rolling out tutorials on Affinity Designer starting in January. So you'll be able to find those in our Facebook group and on our YouTube channel when we start those at that time. So all we'll do is click over to our pixel persona, which is the little icon here at the top. When you hover over it, it does say pixel persona. And you'll see that our tools here have changed. We are going to start by importing our graphic. So I will go ahead and do that by going to File and then Place. Let's get all of our document types here. And I'm just pulled this photograph off of Adobe stock. I did not actually license it because I did not want to waste the credit just for this tutorial. So this little grandma is going to be watermarked, but it looked like a good picture to use for this tutorial. You want to click and drag to bring your graphic in, and you want to resize it about to where you would like it to be on your document space. So I'm going to make this pretty big to begin with, so that it's just a little bit easier to work with and get all around our edges. So the first thing we want to do is remove this background, and you would follow this step no matter what background you were trying to remove. What you're going to do is right click on the graphic, and you're going to select this option to rasterize. When you do this, let me see. The name might be a little too long. Let me just shorten this. Okay, so you can see, I just shortened the name so you could see the type of layer it is. It says that this is an image layer. In order to be able to edit it, it needs to say that it is a pixel layer. You can't edit vector layers in the pixel persona either. You can only edit those that are raster-based format. So we will right-click on that and rasterize. And when we do that, it's going to convert it to a pixel formatted graphic. And now we can go ahead and start making edits. So let me zoom in just a little bit so it's easier for us to see. We'll start down here along this grandma's cheek. We're going to be using our selection tool. So that's this one over here that looks like a paintbrush with a little dotted line underneath it. And this is honestly really quick and easy. We want to make sure that we have snap to edges selected because that's going to help it snap along the edge of any little shade difference along our grandma. We have the option to add or subtract. We're going to be adding to start, of course, and you do want to make sure you have soft edges selected because that's just going to give you a smoother edge all around. Now, this 1000 pixels is notably way too big. It covers her whole face basically. So let's come to our width and let's try about 180. All right, 180 I think will work. We can always, go in and refine it afterwards. So you can really start anywhere. I always try and start at some place that is kind of a smooth edge. So all you're going to do is hold down your left cursor and basically just drag it along everywhere that you want to save. So this is the part that we want to save this part. We want to remove the background. You want to make sure that all those little marching ants are gone as you're going. And if you see any edges like this that you want to get out, you just kind of like give it a little click and it will bring it out. It's honestly really easy. All right, Grandma's cut off on the edge here, so we're going to keep on following through, make sure we get her as much as possible. There's another little section there. All right, so see how I accidentally added this whole bottom section that has nothing? We'll click over to subtract, and then all we had to do was click on that and it removed it. And then we'll go back to add and we'll keep on going. So you can use a smaller nozzle if you have something that has trickier edges. We might switch to the smaller one when we get up to her hair. But for the sweater that we're working on here, this is just fine. And because this is pixels and no one who looks at this is going to be this close to it, it's perfectly fine if you don't get every single little pixel square. You're trying to get basically all the solid pixels, and that's what the program's going to pick up on its own. The pixels that are half filled are the ones that it might not pick up as easily. So now let me zoom out to make sure we got all of her sweater. We don't have any marching ants in there. Yep, we're good there. So now we're going to focus on her face. And again, we can kind of click and drag to get like a rough guideline going here, but we are probably going to have to go in around her hair and give it a much more refined selection. So always try and be a little careful around these things. Okay. So now I'm going to change my nozzle size and I'm going to go down a lot smaller. Let's try like 50. And now I'm just trying to get these little pieces of her hair and whatnot that are in the background. You don't necessarily need to get all of them, but I do want to get any that are going to be kind of obvious if they are not selected. See, like I'm going to leave that one out just because it's so faded in the background. I don't think it'll matter. I want to make sure I fix that little chunk that looks like it's being taken out right there, right there. These ones along this edge. So something like hair can get kind of tedious, I guess, as you're working around it, but this is pretty easy otherwise. And you would do this even if you had like a really busy background, like maybe there's a bunch of people in the background, you'd still do the same overall steps. I'm gonna just expand down right there. I think we did pretty good. Let's zoom out for a second and see where we're at. All right, it looks like we've got a good selection on our grandma here. Again, this is from Adobe stock. This is not my grandmother. My grandmother has asked that I try not to use her in video demos. And I don't think she would appreciate me using her for a memorial one when she is still very much alive. So, all right, so once we have it all selected, what you're going to do now is select your move tool. Try not to like shift this. If you shift this, you're going to end up with a weird shadow line. But all you're going to do is right click on your actual grandma selection and you're going to copy, and then you're going to right click again and you're going to paste. And then you're going to go to select and you're going to do deselect, and then you're going to completely delete the original. So now we just have our grandma here. And we can zoom in and we can get a good look to see how her edges and stuff look. Now, when you have something like the hair that's here, that's when you might want to consider using your blur tool to sort of soften those edges, or I'm sorry, your smudge tool. So You can use the smudge brush tool or the blur brush tool. It's kind of up to you. The blur brush tool might be better. I know I said the smudge, but we'll grab the blur brush tool, and we can see we've got our choice in opacity, flow, and hardness. We're just going to focus on that width. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Let's try about a 50. And I want to zoom in so you guys can see this a little better. Some of these edges around her hair, I'm just going to kind of blur them out basically. And this is just going to soften that line. And if you happen to see any areas that you want to erase in this, that's when you can also use the, the erase brush tool, the one that looks like an eraser. But we're just really focusing on blurring out some of these harder edges around her hair so that they look a little bit natural. And you'll notice that when you're using something like the blur brush tool or the smudge brush tool, that it makes very subtle changes. It's not super dramatic. I mean, if you want it to be dramatic, you basically just keep going over it because you're layering that action through there. But we do want it to be pretty subtle because we want this to overall look natural. We just want it to look like this was her natural smoothness of her hair. And we really are just mostly focusing on the edge of her hair. Her sweater and stuff's not going to matter, but her hair has some jagged edges just because of how the selection tool picks it up, and we're smoothing that right out. I know it might be a little bit harder to see. Let me see if I can zoom in and make it easier for you guys to see this in action. Okay, so this is a darker little section of hair. So see how you've got all those jagged edges? And then all we're doing is just running over that. And see, it smooths it right out, kind of blurs them together. And that's all we're doing. It doesn't really take a lot. As you can see, I'm just kind of going along around the edge of her hair and helping give that a little smoothness. All right. All right, Grandma's hair looks looks much better. So now what we're going to do is import our wings, and we're kind of working from the front to the back with this particular one, but I don't want Grandma to be impacted by the wings. So I'm going to actually just move her off of my workspace for the moment. So I just dragged her over. If you don't see her on the side, you just need to go to view mode, and make sure that clip to canvas is deselected. So there should be no check mark here. When it's checked, you can't see anything off your canvas. When it's deselected, you can. So now we will import our wings. So we will go to File and Place, and these wings. I did license these wings off of Adobe stock, and I did add the link to license these in the video description as well. So these are some super generic wings. Because this background is 100% black, we can actually use a different little trick in Affinity Designer, which is we are going to start by rasterizing this. So I'll just rename this by clicking on the layer, wings. You see that it says image. We're going to right click and rasterize to make it a pixel. And then we're going to click on select sampled color. We're going to select the black. All I did was click on it, and you see how the marching ants have now formed around the wings. It has selected the black and omitted the wings. It'll select whatever color you want. You can adjust your tolerance if you happen to have like grays and things like that. We don't actually need to do that with this. It selected the black perfectly because this is a solid black background. So the best time to use this little technique is if you have a solid black or solid white type of background. If you don't have something more complicated. Anything that's more complicated, you want to use the selection tool. So we will hit apply. And then you can choose to hit delete on your keyboard or backspace. I believe that when I showed this in a previous video, the delete key didn't work on Macs. So if that's the case, you can just go to edit and cut. And just like before, you don't want to move anything until you deselect it. So you want to go to select and then deselect. And then we have our wings. So now we can go ahead and size up our wings and add grandma, and then we can add a background and maybe some text. So for this one, I'm going to make the wings as big as I can here. And then I'll bring grandma back over. We want to make sure that she is at the top of our layers panel. So you simply drag that up and above all the other layers. You want to make sure that when you are dragging, that you are keeping your cursor over to this side space area, and you'll see that solid shadow line that's right here. That's the line that you want to see. It should go all the way across. If your line is like this, if you look at the screen or our document space, you'll see that grandma is clipped inside of the wings. We don't want that. We want her to be on top of them, and I'm just showing you below. But then we drag her up top and she is there. So make sure that you're not clipping it into, if you drag it into the name like this, where you see that 3/4 rectangle, you're activating a clipping mask and you're turning the wings into a clip, and then your grandma is clipping into that, which we don't need to do. All right, so we will resize grandma down just a little bit. And we'll get her centered over these wings to make this look really nice. All right, I'm going to kind of put her down a little bit, and I'll move the wings down. All right, so she's centered. Our wings are looking, I feel like our wings are not quite straight. Our wings are looking good. We got our wings where we want them. These snapping guides that you see, the red and green lines, those are called snapping guides. If they are not activated on your screen, you can activate them by clicking on the magnet icon at the top of the screen. And you can click on this little down arrow to select all of the different snapping guides that you can utilize. I like to have them all on because it just allows your graphic to sort of snap into place, so you can make sure it is centered or aligned to different objects that are on your workspace. So now we have our memorial wings on our grandma. And you can actually choose to select both of these layers and right click and group them together if you would like, so that they're easy to move around however you wish. Now we need to add a background because the wings and grandma are going to be a little hard to see on a white t-shirt that we would have for sublimation. So I'm going to make her a little bit smaller, and I'm going to zoom in. That was a bit too far. Okay, sorry about that. So I made her a little bit smaller so that we can work on adding a background and then add some text. Something that I want you to notice right now is that there is a line on our screen right here. And that is the edge of our wings, which did not end up clipping off when we deleted our background. It's an easy fix. We're going to grab the wings and we're going to select our erase brush tool, and we're just going to erase it. And just like that, it is gone. Super easy. I'm glad that happened so I could show that to you. Now, I just want to say this for those of you who are very new to using the Pixel Persona. This is an erase brush tool. It is not an eraser. It will mimic whatever brush you have selected. So it's important to remember that, because if you have a cloud brush stroke selected, you're going to erase a cloud, not a solid line like we just had. So for our background, I am going to want to add sort of like a watercolor blob that'll be like my clouds, or be like my sky, and then I'll add some clouds because I have some really cool cloud brush strokes here that I love. I linked that brush pack in the video description as well. It's one of my favorites. I've used it a lot in my designs. It's clouds and smoke, and it is one of my favorites. You'll find that in the video description. So let's start with our paintbrush tool. And I'm going to come over here to my brushes panel, and I'm just looking for something pretty basic. Let's just try our generic watercolors that come with Affinity Designer. Yeah, we can just work with something like this. Let's see how this low absorption bristles goes. We want to come down to the bottom of our layers panel and select add pixel layers, this little icon that looks like a checkerboard. And we want to drag that below our grandma. And you can just rename this if you want to make it easy. Make sure you have your pixel layer selected. I have a pretty small nozzle at the moment. I want this to be much bigger. Let's try about 500. Okay. And then for color, we want something that's kind of a light blue. You know, we want it to be like a sky blue, just enough to be blue without being too much. So that should probably work. And then you're just going to click and drag. You want to kind of do this as much as a fluid motion without clicking off as you can if you're trying to create a background here. And if you were using a shirt, for example, and you had a template, you could actually just fill it with blue and let the dimension around all of this be created by simply adding the clouds. So it always kind of depends on what you're working on. I have not lifted my finger off of my mouse click. What are they called? I just realized I don't know, but my mouse click yet, because when we do, it'll create a different stroke on top of this, and we want this to look like one solid watercolor stroke. All right, so I've just got this nice blog. I just deselected off of that, but see, if I went back over, we would be adding a whole nother layer, which is not what we want. So I'm going to undo those strokes really quick. And now I'm going to switch my stroke color to white. And I'm going to come over here to my brushes panel again, and I'm going to choose those cloud brushes. Now, if you don't have cloud brushes, you could always choose to just download some clouds, some cloud graphics, and you can use the same steps that I just used for the angel wings and for grandma to add them in here. Love the cloud brushes personally. Here we go. And I'm going to use these ones that are like a stamp, because these ones are just my favorite. So you've got all these different stamp clouds to choose from. I'm going to start with this one. And I'm basically just going to align this behind grandma in a way that looks good to me. And I like to switch around with different clouds that are here because there is such a good variety. And I am trying to create a bit of a dimension. Okay, I'm actually going to create the next ones in a new layer. So I'm going to select add pixel layer. I want this pixel layer to be on top of the other one, but I'm going to bring the opacity down to about 50%. So that my cloud will look a little bit softer. And you could also just change the opacity of the brush, but I like to make stuff like this a second layer in case I don't like it and I just want to get rid of it. So there's that one, and let's see how this one looks. That was a little too blobby. All right, this one's kind of got like the angel cloud sort of texture to it. So sort of just added one of those over there. And I'm going to go back to that original layer that we created, and you just add one more. Let's see how this one does. That one might work just a little bit smaller. Let's do it about 1500 pixels. Okay. Now, we just wanted to add enough clouds to make the blue stand out a little bit more without adding so much that it completely overpowers the blue, because we're going to be putting this on presumably a white shirt. So you could have done a double layer of the watercolor if you wanted, but to me, this is actually pretty great. So now I'm going to add some text to this. I just want to look and see if there's any place I should clean up, and see how we have these clouds up here. They're not going to print with sublimation, so we do want to clean those up. So I'm going to select that pixel persona and use that erase brush tool. But again, because it is an erase brush tool, I need to go over to basic and just choose the solid fill, and then just sort of erase that down into my watercolor layer there. And on that side too. There we go, because that isn't going to print off anyways. Now, you might want to consider blurring out this sharp edge. If you have that, you can always choose to do something like that. I'm going to add text over it because I actually think that that is a little bit easier. And I think that it looks better, because I'll just show you. I'm going to grab the grandma here and I'm going to select that smudge brush tool. And if we smudge this, see how it's sort of blending it out? It's not really what we want. It's going to continue to have sort of a sharp edge. If she had more of a torso, then I would definitely go below her arms and use that smudge brush tool and blend it out into the clouds. But since she doesn't, we're just going to put text over it. So this is something to keep in mind, because if someone gives you a photo, it could be like this, where it's chopped off right at the elbows, or it could be a whole body. And that gives you a little bit more wiggle room ideas of how to go about blending her in and creating that memorial graphic. This would be a great one just to put like a banner here, but I will undo that smudge brush tool first. Okay. And then we'll just click over to our designer persona, because you cannot add text in your pixel persona. So over here in our designer persona, we're going to go ahead and add some text, and we can actually select our entire graphic, and we can move this up and move grandma up as well. So before we add some text, because using our smudge brush tool or our erase tool is going to alter grandma, and there's two things here. One, your customer might not like the end result, and you might not either. So I like to use what I'm about to show you as a much better technique to give you a smooth transition than completely editing the photo. And this is one of the things that I love about Affinity Designer, is the fact that you have these roster-based editing tools and your full suite vector program, so that you can switch back and forth between those different tools and take advantage of certain tools for certain types of enhancements or edits that you are doing to any kind of project. Something like this, I always try and minimize the amount of impact I'm going to have on the core object, for example, the grandma in this case. So to work around that, because we do want to get rid of this harsh edge down here, what we're going to do is we're going to create a rectangle. So we're going to select our rectangle tool. We're going to click and drag that along the bottom here. And we'll zoom in so you can see this a little bit better. We are going to set our blend mode of that rectangle to erase. And then we're going to come here to our transparency tool, and we're going to click towards the bottom and drag up. Now, this little slider here will allow us to adjust that and adjust that up. And then of course we can bring it in so it matches grandma. I'm going to bring it down just a little bit. There we go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to drag it into our group here. So we're going to drag it into the group. And then we are going to select the rectangle and grandma. Rectangle should be on top of grandma, and you're going to right click and group those as well. And then all you need to do is make some final adjustments with your rectangle. You can choose to move it up a little bit, and you can click back on that transparency tool and you can adjust that slider or the start and end point as well. Now our goal here is just to give this little softness that you can work with. And the advantage of doing this is we're going to put text down here. So this sort of helps soften all of that relatively easily without actually editing grandma itself. If we deselect that rectangle, we still have grandma. So if we need to make some edits or change her size or anything, we can still do that. If we wanted to change the picture, we can still do that. So this is a little workaround that you can play with for something like this if you are not having good luck or good results with that smudge brush tool. And our goal here was just to soften how the edge of that picture was going. And zooming out, it looks like we could actually soften it a little more. So we can grab that rectangle and sort of drag it up. And again, you can click on that transparency tool, which is the one that sort of looks like a glass, and you can adjust the little slider here and also adjust the start and end point. So I see that line right there and I don't want that. And that's from that edge of the picture. So we want our start point to be basically right on that edge. See how when it's right on the edge, that edge of grandma disappears? That's what we want. And now we're just going to put text over top of this. So we could select our artistic text tool and then we will click and drag, and this is not the color that we want. So let's go over to our color tab. Let's get rid of that stroke. There we go. There's some black. And we will resize that nice and big. This font is called Darlston. I've had this for years. It was one of those like free fonts of the week somewhere. And it's actually one of my favorites to use for something like this or holiday items that you want to look a little bit more polished. It's just like a nice, clean script font. It's one of my favorites. It's a little thin though. So I'm going to make sure I have my text selected, and I'm going to come over here to my color panel, select my open circle to add a stroke, bring my stroke down to black, click on my stroke panel and decrease the width of that so that it's just enough to make my font look a little thicker without overpowering the curves of the font. The next thing that you can do is go to your effects panel with your text layer selected, and you can choose to add an outer glow. So adding an outer glow, as you can see, it's sort of transitioning there. All it's doing is just adding more to that glowing fade out effect that we have on grandma. And then you could choose to add text up top, beloved grandma, wonderful mother, you will be missed, anything like that. But just to keep it simple, I will leave this here like this. And that is about it. So if you are ready to export this so that you can print it, you will just go to File and Export, and you will choose PNG, and you will export your whole document, and then you will just go ahead and save this. And you will be able to print that or import it and size it and print it, or import it and put it on a template if you have a template. And you can, of course, do things like select that background layer and bring it down if you didn't want to have quite so much background, and you can make further edits to it, make a whole new background back in your pixel persona. So I love that Affinity Designer has this versatility because it does offer just enough of those roster editing features to allow you to do a lot of really common things that people want to do for sublimation, printing, and designing. This tutorial is one that has been asked for a little while, and I'm glad I finally had a chance to get to it. If you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Of course, if you're on YouTube, commenting is turned off, so you can post your questions in sub that. instead. Again, those links are in the video description depending on where you're watching. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this lesson, if you did enjoy learning this part of Affinity Designer and you want to learn the entire software super in depth, get tons of practice, learn how all the different applications that you can use for sublimation, then check out the Affinity Designer Digital Graphic Design Masterclass for sublimation. Use the code SUBTHAT to save $30. And if that's not what you're looking for or not within your budget right now, then check out our other free tutorials underneath the group guides or the Affinity Designer playlist on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your evening.